But the wake up calls, I want you to start to look at, do you feel spread thin? Now, right now, life is pulling us in a million different directions. We want to look at, do you feel spread thin?
You're listening to episode 212 of the Building Psychological Strength podcast, where we uncover the information, tools, and techniques to turn our mind into our most valuable asset. Hey everyone, welcome back to this Wednesday episode of the Building Psych Strength podcast. I'm April and I'm your host, and I'm really, really excited about this week's topic. This week's topic is actually a sneaky and tough one, but it's one that is very near and dear to my own heart because it is one that I've struggled with for a very long time. So I'm really excited. Ashley's here with me and we're going to unpack this fun topic this week.
That'll be a good one.
All right. So this week we are talking about something called overfunctioning. Ashley, tell me what overfunctioning is and what it looks like specifically when people come to you who need help, where this might be at the core or one of the pieces that might be influencing how they're feeling.
Absolutely. So when I think about overfunctioning, it's functioning above and beyond what is reasonable for you as an individual. And so I tend to think about it in terms of in systems, right? So whether we're looking like within a relationship, within a family system, within a workplace team, but it's that it involves a group of people. And so when someone is over functioning, it's they're taking on a bigger piece of I like to call it the responsibility pie. Like if we had responsibility and we divvied up the pieces, someone is taking on too much. So they are responsible or in charge of controlling or doing the lion's share of the work. And it happens for a number of reasons. It develops out of a lot of ways, but it can be really problematic because then it feels like if you're the one who's over functioning, it's the weight of the world is on your shoulders. Or you're having to do things to keep the system afloat or to keep someone else from drowning because they're under functioning in response. And so it's a lot to kind of unpack, and I'll pause there for a second, but then we can really talk about like where it comes from and what it looks like, and more importantly, what to do about it.
Yeah, this reminds me of a topic we covered in December. So if your ears are perking up right now, just know that there's a number of episodes that we've done that can help you unpack this topic and topics like it. We talked about healthy selfishness in December of 2020. And if this is piquing your interest, I would obviously check out this episode that you're listening to, but consider going back to that one because you'll get some additional color there. That being said, it's interesting because when we think about, why we may find ourselves in an overfunctioning situation, it seems a little counterintuitive because it doesn't feel good, right? It doesn't feel good for the person who's overfunctioning to feel like they're carrying this superhuman burden of work. That's not a comfortable situation to be in. But we've talked a lot, and I want to hit a fundamental sort of principle of the mind, because I feel like if people just knew 4 or 5 things about how their mind work and got really good at applying them to different situations,
Easier.
yeah, like, I mean, the world would function differently. And this is one of those times. One of the most like fundamental things about our mind is that, we only have so much capacity for making decisions in a day, for being really deliberative and thoughtful and engaged in a day. And so, one of the things that our mind tries to do in order to free up resources for us and keep us available to be thoughtful and have some energy left and decision making capability left is that it automates as much as possible. It creates habits and it creates sort of automated scripts that run in our mind, which causes us to do certain behaviors without even thinking about them. So, the example I always use with people is like when you get in the shower and you are going to wash your hair, do you use shampoo or conditioner first?
Shampoo.
Right. And how hard do you think about that each time you go to do it?
Zero thought.
You don't, right? So your mind has already said it's shampoo, then conditioner. It's shampoo, then conditioner. And it takes that decision off the plate. You don't even think about it. You wash your hair, then you condition your hair, and then you move on and you don't make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, our mind gets habituated, familiar with, it creates a habit around certain behaviors, like many of the ones that lead to overfunctioning, to the point where it happens without us even realizing it. And even if it feels terrible.
Right. Well, and it's so my mind is going in a couple of different directions because, like, if we kind of look at, I mean, a lot of times when I think about over functioning, I think about it as a parent in a family, and
Mm,
often it's the mom. And when I think about, where that comes from, like when you become a parent, you have this infant that is completely dependent on you. You have to over function because that child cannot function independently. So you do, right? You feed it, you monitor it, you sleep, you do all these things. Somewhere along the way, kids develop agency. They start to
mm,
develop skills. And unless you're really intentional in stepping back and letting that child have the chance to use those skills or even develop new skills and learn and all of that, parent swoops in and does it for them. And then they're over functioning. And it's cute when they're little. When they are 16 and can't do basic things for themselves, that's where it becomes a problem. And you have these systems that develop where one person is over functioning and the others are under functioning.
mhm,
So that's one. And I mean, it comes out in other ways too. Like you can have maybe someone who loses some of their functioning, they get sick, they have an injury, mental health concerns, and they're not able to function in the same way they were. So the other person in the family kind of steps up because they have to, right? If one, like I think about, let's say a parent has significant depression and can't do the things that they used to do, the other parent steps in. And then all of a sudden we've got this, one is over functioning and one is under functioning. And the way relationships work is that we're looking at dynamics. It's a two-way street. So I think it's really important to kind of keep that in mind. If we don't always necessarily know where it starts, and maybe it feels like I don't have a choice, I have to step in, or the whole system crashes. But once they get going, they do become habitual.
mhm,
And then people and systems tend to perpetuate themselves. They want to keep this homeostasis, right? This kind of like baseline functioning or kind of working, even if it's kind of broken or even if
mhm.
it's unhealthy. And you can see this like not even just at home, like let's put it in a work context. And you have teams, right? Like when I work with teenagers and we can all think back to like, did you love group projects? Probably not, right? And why? Like, why is it that you don't like group projects? Because if you care about your grades, then that means you're going to overfunction if you're in a group with a slacker because you care about the outcome. So you have to put in more work. Then you're doing the lion's share. They're not doing it. Everybody gets the A. People hate it. Same thing happens at work too. People overfunction because you've got an outcome you're reaching, you've got a job that has to be done. And if not everybody's willing to do it or able to do it, someone has to take it on. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
overfunctioning piece.
Well,
And then
and what I think is awesome about the first two examples you gave, the example of in a relationship with your kids, and then also in a relationship with, say, a significant other, and maybe there's an injury or something. In both of those cases, it begins very logically.
yeah,
Of course, you are going to take care of that baby. Of course, as that person's significant other, you're going to help them and take care of them. But what can happen, and this is my grand hypothesis of, and I'm going to raise my hand and say I was that woman who was over functioning to the point that I was I mean, I was really, really having a hard time. This, in fact, is the thing that sent me to therapy the second time that I went. Like, I've been to therapy twice in my life, and this is the topic that sent me there the second time because, and here's where my hypothesis comes from. In the United States, this is not everywhere, but it is the case for us in the United States. In the United States, when a woman has a baby, you get a very short amount of time, 6-ish weeks. There's laws, it varies and depends, but you have some amount of time, 1 to 3 months, where that woman typically is home with the baby, but typically no one else in that family gets any kind of leave.
right.
Now, unless you're financially completely set and you don't need that person's salary and maybe their job will be held for them. Typically, that other person, that significant other, if there is a significant other, they have to go back to work.
Mhm.
So what happens is you're in this situation where logically you are the only one who
Right.
can, attend to that baby's needs.
Mhm.
And as we talked about, and this is why I wanted to bring up that fundamental thing of our mind's ability to create habits. Isn't it funny that and women who are listening to this who have had babies this might sound familiar. You are maybe more tuned to that baby's cry and hear it faster. It's more aversive to you. You're quicker to act.
Mhm.
You're more sensitive to it than your partner. You've been trained to be more sensitive to it. You also might, this is going to sound gross, you also might smell that baby when they need their diaper changed way quicker because you've been trained to
Mhm.
know what those signs are and what those cues are. So you get really, really quote unquote good at being the one who can quickly rush in and take care of the situation for a being who cannot take care of themselves. But
Mhm.
then at some point, and this is where the thing flips and where stuff gets tough, at some point, maternity leave ends and you go back to work, or some people do. Let's say you do. You go back to work, and we never question whether the way that we've been operating before is the way that we should continue to operate because our mind has now created a habit loop that says shampoo, then
Right.
conditioner, in the same way that you did not question which one to use this morning when you showered. In so many of these situations, and we're just using childcare as one example, we can get conditioned to be the one who thinks that they have to act when in fact other people could. And they get conditioned to not act because
Bingo.
they haven't had to.
And that I think is like such an important piece of this when it comes to overfunctioning is understanding it in that dynamic context, right? Like it's that two-way street. They're also learning I don't have to function or I can't do it, right? There's a lot of unspoken messages that go and it's yeah, there's just a couple of things kind of floating in my mind. And one is that, from that overfunctioning standpoint, like the downsides of it is that
Mm-hmm.
it can be very stressful for the one who's doing it. There can be a lot of resentment that can grow. There can be, to be honest, there are some positive reinforcements that come too of feeling like I am the good mom or I'm
Mm-hmm.
the good boss or this kind of martyr everything it hinges on me. And sometimes that can be a really strong motivator.
I'm critically important. And if I
Mhm.
don't do it, I definitely felt that way.
Right? Like
I
I feel
wouldn't have admitted at the time, but looking back, I definitely felt that way.
yeah, and that's where this can get hard because I think sometimes when people are over functioning, it doesn't necessarily register as a bad thing.
Hmm.
It either feels like a good thing, like this part of my identity or my I am needed. Look at what I do and contribute. So it can almost feel like it's based on your values.
Hmm.
I think it gets twisted and we should come back to that. But the other downside is that it can really hobble the other people involved in the system. If you continue to overfunction, they don't have to step up. They may not even have the chance to step up. And so when I really think about this as a parent, from that perspective, right, every parent I've ever known tells me they want their kids to eventually to be healthy, happy, functioning adults.
Hmm.
I very rarely have one say, you know what, I really hope that when my kid is 40, they live in my basement. Occasionally it happens, but not often. So the thing is, all right, but if we want kids to be able to do that, they have to have the opportunity to start to function and to learn those skills. And without that, you're never going to get there. And so we have to give them that space. If you can't
Hmm.
step back, they never have that chance. But that's so hard to do because it starts to tap into a few things. It could be if I don't do it, it won't get done. If I don't do it, I'm a bad parent or I'm a bad boss or I'm a bad spouse, right? I'm a bad whatever. Um, I'm causing harm, right? Like in a system, if one person tries to change, the rest of the system's going to fight for that equilibrium. Meaning, I like to think of it this way, like if you put your money in the Coke machine, you push the button, you get a Coke, you push the button, you get a Coke, you push the button, you get no Coke. You're going to shake the machine, right? You're going to kick it, you're going to curse, you're going to give up. And then you walk away. And if the next time you put your money and you push the button, you don't get a Coke, eventually you're going to stop using that machine. And I bring that up because that's what systems do. So if you're hearing this and it's kind of clicking with you and you're like, yeah, I overfunction. That doesn't work for me anymore. I'm going to stop. I want you to expect the system is going to shake the machine. They're used to pushing the button,
Mm.
getting a Coke, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm not going to overfunction for you anymore. I'm going to let you step up. They're going to shake the machine. That doesn't mean it's not working or that you have to do it. It just means, hey, there's a change in the system.
Hmm. In behaviorism, they call that an extinction burst, where,
Mhm.
a kid or a dog or anybody who's learning, any being that's learning, realizes that what they were doing to get a reward or get an outcome they wanted in
Mhm.
the past isn't working anymore. And so there's this burst that is a heightened version of the thing that they were doing before to try to get the reward. So instead of pushing the button, they bang on the button, or instead of
Yeah.
pushing the button, they shake the machine, or instead of asking, you may yell. You just turn the volume up on whatever thing you were trying to do to get the outcome before. And it's funny because when it's counterintuitive, because you see that, and to your point, you think, oh, this isn't working. Like, this
Yeah,
is not
absolutely.
working. Oh
Mhm.
my gosh. But when in fact, you encourage people in that situation, when you see this extinction burst, know that you are on the right path. It means that people have now noticed that something's different. And that's a good thing, because awareness is the first thing that has to happen for any change to happen. So I love that you brought that up. That is so good.
Mhm.
Because it'll be counterintuitive for folks when they start to make a change and things go a little wonky at first.
Absolutely. That I liked it. You gotta know to expect that. And the other piece, like if we kind of shift, like I know when I think about over functioning, it's sort of that the individual versus the systemic levels, right? Like you as a person versus the system that you're in. So that with the code machine, we're talking about the system, but also on an individual basis, there are other reasons. Like there's the habits or why we overfunction. Other people train us that we have to. Like if you're the parent of a kid who's anxious, I mean, that's what I work with all the time, right? Parents end up stepping in and they're overfunctioning just in terms of like even helping their kid cope because their kid has such big
Mm.
feelings. They have to step in to cope for their kid. So it's really hard. And then if you stop doing that, what that's going to do for you, moms and dads, is you're going to feel really anxious because it's hard to see that in your kid. Or if you step back, then we have our own worries about like, if I don't do this and it doesn't get done, like, or if I'm not juggling all these balls and one gets dropped, it's going to be terrible or it's going to be catastrophic. So we kind of get driven by these fears or these worries to overfunction. And that's a place where I like to kind of step back too and question, really, like, is it that bad? What would actually happen? Is it going to be a catastrophe if someone gets out of the house with their hair sticking out crazy for once? No, probably not. And what would really happen if you forgot something, right? If you didn't do it, and let's say everybody else did forget, is it really the end of the world?
Yeah. And it's funny because um, we're talking about parenting a lot here, but it does happen a lot within the context of that system. Although, to be fair, so many others are relevant as well.
Mhm.
Within the context of parenting, I'm going to use that as an example, but again, it's very relevant for a lot of other situations we find ourselves in. The morph from the moment when, say, your kid, so my youngest daughter is 2.5, almost on the dot right now. And about, I would say 2 months ago, um, we went from putting her jacket on. We're in the winter in Minnesota, so big coats. We went from putting her jacket on for her. I looked at her and I thought, oh man, I bet at some point she has crossed over the line to being a kid who can put her own jacket on. I bet she can get this on. I bet if I show her how to do it, she could get it on. And she did it in a second that day. So
Uh-huh.
it's the thing. I don't know if parents who have kids, you like throw their jacket on the floor and they flip it up over their head and put it on. Super easy, quick, easy way for kids to put their jacket on. But the point I'm making is that a lot of times when you're in the position where you've been doing something for someone in the past, especially kids or people who are learning something new or onboarding at work, onboarding onto a new task, it's tough to know when somebody has crossed the line into being able to take on that task. And the
Mhm.
only way you're going to know is if you try it out and see how they do, because
Yeah.
evolution and adaptation that we go through is so gradual that I want to speak directly to parents who maybe feel like we're being a little attacky right now, because I know how that feels. It's hard to notice and realize that your kid may have crossed that line and now they can. You're just
Mhm.
sort of going about your day-to-day business and doing the stuff that you've done before. But that's really the point that we're making today, is it's so easy to get habituated into these cycles. And the more you allow that to pile up, and for the length of time that it can, you can find yourself in a situation where you're really getting stretched thin and run down.
Mhm.
And we've talked a lot on the podcast about look for episodes titled things like "You Are the Asset." We talk about people who are people of high responsibility, what can happen in that regard.
Mhm.
Again, the healthy selfishness episode. I did a Monday Mindset Minute episode on pathological altruism. I mean, there's a lot that comes into here, which basically says we can't take on more than one human being's worth of responsibility for very long.
Right. Well, and what's kind of going through my mind is the way to think about it is, because I understand how we end up in these positions, right? I don't think anybody goes, oh, you know what? I want to take on so much that I am resentful or that I'm maxed out or I'm underperforming, or I want to cripple the people around me and keep them from reaching their full potential, right? No one says that. And yet that's what happens. And we end up in that sort of unintentionally, right? It's just when we're being reactive to the situations, we kind of do that. But with this over functioning, we're talking about taking on responsibility for someone else's functioning. So we also talk a lot about control, getting really clear about what is and isn't in your circle of control. And when you're taking on responsibility for something that's actually in someone else's, that's what we're talking about here. You're kind of crossing that line. And we can make all of these, I don't know if it's excuses or rationalizations or even just like acknowledging how we got to this point. It was I mean, I think there's something like on a genetic or biological level when it comes to a mom and a baby that like on a brain level that makes you more tuned in and
Mhm.
responsive, and then it becomes habitual, right? But our behaviors also shape our brain. So it's a really complex thing there. But we need to be able to like understand how we got there, but then really look at like, nope, I am responsible for me. And you can be very caring. Like, I mean, my day job, I'm a caring professional. I'm a therapist by day, and I have this conversation with colleagues like a lot of like, wait, where's the line that I had that we draw in terms of helping, right? Like, if I'm reaching out, say, hey, you haven't scheduled, it's time to schedule. Hey, it's time to schedule. Like, am I over functioning for the client that I'm working with? Like, at some point, it's not that's not my job. Like I have to give them the space to kind of step up and really looking at, I think it's the short term versus the long term. Like in this moment, it feels better. I'm doing the right thing, but what habit am I creating in the long run for both of us?
Mhm.
What cycle is being developed?
Yeah. And so much about this that's so amazing. And if anything, it should give people the understanding that the processes that lead us into positions like overfunctioning are so natural and so sneaky. They happen all the time. And it's actually very adaptive. Again, like imagine if you had to decide how you were going to wash your hair every morning, you'd be tired by breakfast time.
Absolutely.
And the other 100 decisions you make before you
Mhm.
make it to breakfast. Like it's very adaptive, but sometimes it can go a little haywire and lead us into patterns that aren't helpful for us.
Right.
And if we don't have a pattern interrupt to start to think about things a little bit more critically, we can
Mhm.
find ourselves in a position where we're not doing as well. And so I want people to consider this episode as your pattern interrupt as we
Mhm.
start to talk about ways that you can move yourself out of a situation where you are the one who's over functioning, if that's
Mhm.
the situation you find yourself in.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's even starting to question, like I naturally, so I mean it's not now, it's natural at this point, right? Like view the world in terms of cycles, patterns, and processes. Like I'm trained as a behaviorist and that's how I look. Like what reinforces it? Like think of it, the term that resonates with people is usually self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like if it's that kind of makes sense to people of, you know what, I see myself as say I'm the mom or I'm the CEO or I'm the manager. I'm responsible for all of these people. It is literally my job to make sure things go well. And then we do our jobs well. And then we keep doing them well. And then before we know it, we're doing too much of it. People aren't necessarily holding up their end of the bargain. And then we have to keep going or it's all going to fall apart. And really thinking about things in cycles, the process, the pattern, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm.
But the wake up calls, I want you to start to look at, do you feel spread thin? Now, right now, life is pulling us in a million different directions. We want to look at, do you feel spread thin? Look at the systems you're a part of. And are you doing too much? Are you
Mm-hmm.
feeling resentful of the people around you? And that I know we talk sometimes resentment is a sign that that's a missed boundary. Boundaries and overfunctioning go hand in hand. We step up and do things, maybe hoping people will realize and offer to help, but they're not going to. They're not going to notice necessarily. So that resentment is a sign that either you missed a boundary or maybe you're overfunctioning. Are you worried about things getting done, balls being dropped? Do you have thoughts like, I'm the only one who can do this, or if I don't, it won't get done? Like then we start to have these thoughts or predictions. It's our mind telling us lies and propaganda to keep us kind of in the same habits. Like these, I don't know, what am I missing? I feel like there's some other signs that we
I
would
th-
be functioning.
I think those are huge. I think those are great. I mean, they're the ones that we are going to feel most immediately, this feeling of stress, this feeling of resentment, this feeling of overwhelm,
Mm.
of trying to do too many things at once. My physical sign of it is that, in the, I don't want to trigger any parents here, but in the evening time when my kids were younger than they are now, I mean, they're still very young, but it's a far cry from where we were a year ago. When my kids were very, very young, evenings were just crazy. And if my husband was working in an evening and I was home with the kids by myself, things were extremely hectic. And I started noticing on those evenings that out of nowhere, this is involuntary. I was not meaning to do this. I would just, I would like gasp,
Um,
because what I realized is I wasn't breathing. I wasn't breathing, not deeply at all. I physically was not getting enough oxygen because I was frantically trying to do 9 things at the same time while a kid screamed at my feet. Like
mhm.
it was a lot. And so, we talk about these emotional signals that we might be over functioning, stress, resentment, overwhelm, but look to the physical as well around how your body feels. Are you feeling tight? Where are your shoulders? Are they up in your ears?
Mm.
Those physical, notations and those physical signs that we're holding a lot of stress and we're almost like our body's clenching because we feel like we're physically holding it all together.
Yeah.
That for me was a huge sign.
That is such a good point to bring up. And I think often really tuning into those physical signals can be really powerful. And I mean, it's possible to have all of those stress signals and it not be a response of overfunctioning. I'm thinking about, when I even hopped on for us to talk today, I was having some of that and feeling a little frantic. And it wasn't, I don't think it was overfunctioning, it was just overscheduled. I didn't do a good job kind of pacing my morning today. So sometimes those signals, it may not mean that you're over functioning, but it could be, it's stress for sure.
Yeah.
And I think over functioning is definitely a recipe for stress.
Yeah. So recognizing that and being really self-aware that it might be happening is a great first step.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is we actually want to offer a little resource in this department. This pattern interrupt can be extremely useful, but it can also be really useful to have sort of a rubric for understanding your own behavior. And I love the technique of something called self-ethnography for situations like this where we're trying to understand our own lives, our own behaviors, the role in them, patterns, exactly what you were talking about, Ashley, patterns, systems, processes. So if you go to the link in this episode description, you can get a free download for a self-ethnography page. And this is basically, if you print out a bunch of copies of it, you can do this for 5 days, 3 days, a week, whatever feels about right. But it's basically asking you to keep track of what you are thinking, feeling, doing, and what your energy level is at various time points throughout the day. And as you do this, it's another one of those intentional pattern interrupts that asks you, go back and look at what you did this morning. Like, let's write that all down. And how did it make you feel? Because sometimes, just like using shampoo first, we don't even realize that there was a decision that we made there, or that we could have made there, that there was a decision that we could have made differently there until we intentionally look back at it. And so the self-ethnography exercise can be powerful because it helps you gently look back at those times of your life and then find patterns in it. So go to the link in this episode description. You can download that page, print off a bunch of pages of it, and give it a try and see what you find out about yourself.
Well, and I think that's such a powerful tool. And a lot of I get pushback on that when it comes to like tracking or monitoring, because we like to think we're really self-aware. We are not nearly as aware as we think we are.
Especially not of the automated stuff. That's the
No.
point. You don't need to be aware of them. It's like getting it out of your awareness.
Exactly. So it's well worth doing, and it's something, it's well worth doing. And then, when you're noticing these things and you're starting to see these patterns, then you get to start to ask yourself some key questions. Like, is this really my job? If I continue to take this on as my job, is it moving me toward big picture goals? Like, if we go back to parenting, every parent wants their kid to be healthy, happy, and fully functional. If I continue to do my 22-year-old kid's laundry, Am I moving in that direction or not? No. Right.
Mm.
So you can start to question a little bit. And this opens the door. April, I know you and I are both giant fans of experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
I love to experiment, whether it's from a more like the classic psychology perspective of like, you know what, let me experiment. My mind tells me if I don't make sure everybody is ready to go in the morning, they won't get out the door. Like, all right, well, let's test that out. So I like to look at it as let's test predictions, experiment and see what really happens. Is it really as bad as it feels? Or we can experiment more from that kind of life design perspective of what does it feel like for me? If I step back, does it feel better? Does life kind of match up a little bit? So I love this experimenting with, well, who will step up if I don't do it? Like I think of one, at the office. I mean, if you're in a physical office, I remember having a conversation one time with someone who's like, it's not my job, but if I don't fill the printer paper, it doesn't get filled. Okay. And it was just like such a minor thing, but it was kind of indicative of a lot going on and just this kind of over functioning. So great, let's do an experiment. You don't fill it. See what happens. It did get filled, for the record. It took a little bit longer. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a really nice kind of lesson of this burden isn't actually on you. You don't have to do it. You guys are a team.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be careful. Oh, sorry. I'm not saying that we shirk our responsibilities either. I'm not saying that the goal is to underfunction. It's just to do one human being's worth of work. That's all.
And that's exactly the phrase that I love. Like,
Mm-hmm.
as I part of my morning routine every single morning is to sit and plan out my day and think about what I'm going to do, how I'm going to get various things done, what sort of the sequence of events that needs to happen in order to make the day not sort of chaotic feeling. And that is a question that I write down in this journal that I use every morning, at least 3 times a week. What would it look like if you just allowed yourself to be one human being today? How much of this would you expect one human being other than yourself to get done? If there was another person who was going to do your day today, how much would you expect them to get done? What if you just did that? That's it. And then stop feeling guilty, because you are not, your value is not tied into how much you can get done. And this relates to an episode we recently did, in an interview with Casey Davis. She wrote this incredible book. It's called How to Keep House While Drowning. It's basically, one of her fundamental principles is that your value is not based on how much stuff you can get done in a day or how clean your house is. You're valuable just because you're a person. You're valuable because you're here. And so can you just allow yourself to have a reasonable to-do list and experiment with dropping a few balls once in a while? It'll probably be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Such good stuff there.
Yeah. And there's a lot that we could unpack, a lot more that we could unpack with this topic, but we wanted to give an introduction into it because we know that this is a topic that affects a lot of people. And in a lot of cases, you hear about it. We've mentioned the 2 most common places: at work, in family dynamics, but there are others. So we know that this is a really big topic that impacts people. We talk a lot more. I mean, it's tough to even pinpoint one program that we talk a lot about this in. We talk a lot about this in the Ascend program, number 1. I'll put a link to that in the episode description as well. We talk a ton about this influence of our minds in sort of automating our behavior and in creating our life experience. We also have a bonus module on self-care and on boundaries. So that program is an incredibly good place to go if you want to do some deeper work in this vein. Similarly, we have an even deeper product on just self-care, sort of a mini program on self-care called Self-Care by Design. I'll throw a link to that as well. That program is a great one for recovering overfunctioners who are ready to start taking care of themselves. And I will raise my hand and I will say, I was that person. And life is different when you've taken care of yourself. So I wanted to just call those couple of resources out if you are nodding along with this episode and feeling like you could use a little bit of a helping hand in that direction.
Great resources.
Awesome. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us this week. We're so excited for 2021. There's a lot coming out, there's a lot ahead for the year, and we are absolutely thrilled that you're with us on this journey. So, thanks for tuning into this episode, and we will see you next week for another life focused episode of Building Psych Strength. It's a simple fact that nearly everyone in the world could benefit from building psychological strength, but not everyone will put in the time and effort to do so, but today you did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Building Psychological Strength. Now, if you're interested in building the mental toughness, confidence, and resilience you need to thrive through life's ups and downs, visit us at www.peakmindpsychology.com. Also, if there's someone in your life who could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And if you yourself found this episode valuable, meaning if you took away even one insight that you can use to build psychological strength in your own life, we would so appreciate it if you would drop us a rating and a review on iTunes. The thing is, the more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it is to get this powerful and important content out to the people who need to hear it. Remember, your mind can be your most valuable asset or your biggest liability, and you get to choose. So choose wisely, my friend. And I'll see you next time on Building Psychological Strength.